The first effective treatment for tuberculosis was sunlight, and if you don't believe me, here's the study. The first effective treatment for the Spanish influenza was sunlight, and if you don't believe me, here's the study. When it comes to what happened a few years ago, the same applies. Sunlight is proven to cure acne, psoriasis, and dermatitis. Sunlight helps babies with jaundice survive. If you have depression, sunlight is one of the best things you can do from a scientific standpoint. In the Mediterranean, instead of looking at their diet, look at their sun exposure. They get far more sun and they have less disease. That is one of the factors that we've overlooked. Sunlight lowers your blood pressure, and the mechanism is known. UV causes nitric oxide to be produced, which means that your cardiovascular system becomes more efficient. Vitamin D is one of the most important hormones in your body. 50% of the population is deficient in it. Meanwhile, 0.1% of the world's population are affected by too much sunlight exposure. So should we sunbathe or should we follow the dermatologist's advice? Sunlight is not just something you get for vitamin D. It's a pillar of health that is just as important as everything you eat. Let me tell you what my goal with this video is. My goal is very simple. I want you to walk away from this video knowing that you cannot be healthy without being exposed to the sun. And I'm also going to solve your sunlight problems. If you have problems being in the sun, I'm going to solve them for you. I'm going to show you why you can't tan and why you become red. It is because of those experiences that you believe the dermatologists. While if you were to change a few things about your lifestyle, you would be able to tan and you'll be able to reap the benefits of sunlight, which again, it isn't just vitamin D. In fact, vitamin D supplementation is also very problematic. And I will show you studies proving that this is the case. I need you to verify something, okay? I want you to go into my channel and I want you to go to my first video. And I want you to look at how I look there, okay? I had never sunbathed in my life up until that point. This was April 2020 when I started my channel. I unintentionally documented what happened when I started sunbathing. And I didn't go easy on the sunbathing. Every time there was an opportunity to sunbathe during the summer of 2020, I went to the nearest park, I put my t-shirt down on the grass, and I started sunbathing in my swimming trunks. And I always went when the UV index was the highest, so when the sun emits the most amount of UV radiation. And I'll explain why that is later in the video. I did that for 1 to 2 hours every day, almost the entire summer. And my parents made fun of me because I had become so dark. And just look at how I look at the end of the summer, in August. Look at my tan. Look at how my face changed. And I remember very vividly that the first time I heard that a girl had found me attractive, that I had gotten that communication, that was after that summer, when my third year of high school had begun. That was at the end of that summer in August. That's when girls started finding me attractive, after having sunbathed the entire, summer, gotten my vitamin D levels up and completely transformed everything. Do you know who inspired me to do this? Do you know who made me think that I must do this? And then I did it, and then I experienced absolutely amazing life-changing results. The one who showed me the importance of sunlight is Jack Kruse, Dr. Jack Kruse. If there's anyone who's going to teach you that light is important, that sunlight is important, it's Jack Kruse. Jack Kruse thinks light is so important that he puts it above nutrition. And he wants a paradigm change. What he's trying to do is say that light is far more important than food. Why? Because food is created through light. So he views the entire picture as light. And he figured out by looking at the science that obviously our bodies use the sunlight for energy. See, many people hear Jack Kruse say this, and they say, oh no, this guy is crazy. He's saying that nutrition isn't important. The thing with Jack Kruse is, he has written a book called The Epipaleo Diet, okay? He has written a lot about nutrition. He mentions nutrition in many of his articles. However, his main point is that ignoring your light environment is far more detrimental than messing up your food. That's what he's trying to say. But in reality, of course, you need both. Because even if you were to talk to Jack Kruse about diet, he will say that food is light. So that's a part of your light environment. And by the way, Jack Kruse is one of the best doctors in the world. He has connections to the president of El Salvador. He's friends with Jack Dorsey. He's friends with Rick Rubin. And like a year ago, he had a conversation that spanned many hours with Andrew Huberman on Rick Rubin's podcast. And Jack Kruse completely took over the conversation and lectured him on everything. It was basically a lesson for Andrew Huberman. That's what that entire podcast was. If you're interested, you can listen to that podcast. I listened to it before interviewing Jack Kruse on my channel. If you want to check that video out, it's over here. Wait a minute. You're watching this on a screen, and that screen is emitting light. Now let me ask a question. Is this light affecting you biologically or not? Most people would say no. Most people would say that, oh, sunlight gives you vitamin D, but the light from, the bathroom light or the kitchen light or the phone light, the screen, it doesn't cause anything to happen in the body. It's completely harmless. What if I told you that it causes hundreds of thousands of chemical reactions to occur? To understand why this is and to understand how light affects health, you need to understand a little bit of physics. See, you can see light as a photon, i.e. a particle. A photon is a particle, a light particle, or a wave. We don't care about the wave. A photon has no mass, but it has energy, okay? So this photon has energy, and this photon is the fastest thing in the world because it's light. Light is the fastest thing in the universe. Long story short, that's how light affects us. It provides energy to electrons. These electrons get excited and things happen in the body. It can be anything, but it depends, it's highly dependent on what molecule we're talking about and the action spectra for that molecule. So not all molecules, not all electrons in the body will react to the same type of light. Some light will do some things. Other types of light in other wavelengths will do other things. This brings us to vitamin D because it's a great example of what I just described, and it's one that's known to you. So you've got 7-dehydrocholesterol in your skin, and when UVB hits your skin, 7-dehydrocholesterol turns into pre-vitamin D3. You see what I mean now? UVB turned 7-dehydrocholesterol into pre-vitamin D3 by giving it energy, and it gave it energy through exciting its electrons. That's how it works with all types of light in relation to the human body. Going back to your screen is mainly emitting blue light unless you have a filter on. And even if you have a filter on, unless that filter is 100% red, it's going to be emitting blue and green light. And green light is also problematic, but we'll get to that. Blue light tells your body that it's daytime. Why? Because look at where blue is in the light spectrum. It's in the visible spectrum. And when is the visible spectrum most prevalent? During daytime. So our bodies think that it's daytime when we're exposed to many bright colors in the visible spectrum. And blue light more specifically is the one that's emitted the most during the morning. And in the morning our cortisol levels go up, and our cortisol levels go up when we're exposed to blue light. If it's nighttime and you're exposing yourself to blue light, your brain will think that it's daytime. And the way this happens is the blue light provides the energy for a signal to be sent to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And the suprachiasmatic nucleus is the master circadian clock. Your circadian clock is the way your body tells the time. And that's important because you can't have the same processes going on at nighttime as in daytime. They need to be completely different. The hormone profiles are completely different at different times of the day. And your body has to know what time it is. And it does this primarily through light. So each cell has a circadian clock, but they follow the master clock called the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the brain. It's a region in the hypothalamus. And this region is controlled by the light that goes into your eyes. So whatever goes into your eyes, whatever light goes into your eyes affects all of your cells. The cell phone that you're staring at right now is making it so that your cells produce a bunch of things that they either should be producing or shouldn't be producing. The signal that's going to the suprachiasmatic nucleus is occurring because of the energy that blue light carries. It excites an electron and that signal goes off. And that is how the time is regulated. And that's just blue light. Then there's the rest of the light spectrum. If we go back to UV, UV increases nitric oxide, which means that your blood will flow better if you're exposed to UV light. UV also activates POMC in the brain, and POMC is pretty complicated. I don't understand it that well, but what I do know is that when POMC is activated, one of the things that happens is that you produce an endorphin, and that endorphin is responsible for us being addicted to sunlight. So nature made us addicted to sunlight. And one of the things that happens because of that endorphin is you feel good. It is one of the mechanisms that explain why people who are depressed don't get lots of sunlight. And those who get sunlight, those who are depressed that get sunlight, generally feel a lot better. Their depressive symptoms become a lot better because of the sunlight. So POMC in the brain and UV, that's just one mechanism. You've probably heard of red light therapy. You buy this device that shines red light on your skin, and it increases collagen production, and it increases cellular regeneration, and you get nice skin. Well, a third of sunlight is red light. Sunlight consists of 1/3 red light, which means that if you sunbathe, you get free red light therapy. The way light affects us is by exciting our electrons, okay? Generally speaking, people see sunlight creates vitamin D. That's what they see. That's the only thing they think about in terms of light and health. But the exact same way that UVB creates pre-vitamin D3 from 7-dehydrocholesterol, light works in the exact same way in so many other ways in our body. The rest of the light spectrum affects us in the same way. It excites our electrons. Whatever light you're exposed to will make a bunch of shit happen in your body. That's what I'm trying to tell you. And that's not what the public knows. Okay? Your light environment is a pillar of health, and you need to regulate it if you want to be healthy. Let's address the elephant in the room. You're not going to sunbathe. You're going to avoid the sun if you think the sun is harmful. People think the sun is harmful because it ages your skin and it causes skin cancer. If you damage your skin over time, that causes skin cancer, and no one wants cancer, so they avoid the sun. This is common knowledge. Now, I'm not saying that this is wrong, but I'm saying that you need to understand it if you want to have a different viewpoint on the entire subject. Why is it that the medical establishment and dermatologists say that the sun is harmful? To understand this, you need to understand the light spectrum. UV has a short wavelength. Infrared light has a very long wavelength, or far longer than UV light. The difference is that a short wavelength carries more energy. Okay, this light has more energy, UV has more energy, while infrared light has less energy. And in the middle over here, you've got the visible spectrum. Since UV carries the most energy, it has a greater ability to cause harm because it has a greater ability to change things in the human body. In general, it doesn't penetrate very deep. It stays here on the surface of the skin. Still, it can damage the skin. In contrast, infrared light is used in saunas because most of what it does is just heat you up. It makes you sweat. There are 3 types of UV that you need to worry about. There's UVA, which has the longest wavelength, UVB, which is a shorter wavelength, and UVC. UVC has the shortest wavelength, and it's filtered out by the ozone layer. So generally speaking, it doesn't hit us. If there's a hole in the ozone layer, like there is in certain places in the world, then you're going to be hit by UVC. Humans don't have the ability to deal with UVC because we've never been exposed to it. So UVC is definitely dangerous. The only reason why we've linked sunlight to skin damage and skin cancer is because of UV. Outside of UV, there's no part of sunlight that causes any damage to humans. Thus, we can already establish that when the UV index is low, so let's say below 3, there's no danger in being in the sun. There's no need for sunscreen because the only thing sunscreen does is block UV. That's why dermatologists say use sunscreen, because it blocks UV. Again, the only part that science says is dangerous in terms of what the sun emits is UV, nothing else. So if there's no UV, there's no need for sunscreen, there's no need to worry. If it's 4 p.m., 5 p.m., you don't need sunscreen. You'll never need sunscreen. Usually when you listen to the medical establishment and you listen to a doctor, you listen to a dermatologist, you listen to someone who's an expert in skin cancer, they'll say that we need to avoid the sun, we need to avoid UV, and that will decrease our risk of getting problems, skin damage, skin cancer. They're focusing on the sun, okay? They always focus on the sun. They never talk about the skin. They talk about the skin as the thing that's going to receive damage, but they don't see the skin as something that varies from individual to individual outside of the melanin level, so how dark someone is. There's something called fat composition in the skin. And depending on what your skin is made out of, depending on what you've eaten, your lifestyle factors, the health of your skin in general, UV will either be a blessing or a curse? If the effects of UV were dependent on skin health, wouldn't that explain why there are so many people who say that after switching their diet to something that's very nutrient dense, filled with animal foods, and completely devoid of processed foods, they're able to tan now? Previously, they used to burn in the sun. Now their sun tolerance is much higher and they tan instead of burn in the sun. Their skin doesn't become red, it becomes darker. Why is it that you've seen a bunch of people who are tanned who have amazing looking skin, while you've seen other people who get sun exposure and they become red and they have old wrinkly skin and they've aged their skin severely? It's because of their lifestyle factors and how they influence skin health. You see, to build skin correctly, you need lots of nutrients and you need a certain fatty acid composition in the skin. Certain fats are more reactive than other fats, okay? There's something called the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio in your skin. And if you have a high omega-6 to 3 ratio, so you have a lot of omega-6 for the omega-3 that you have, you'll burn more easily. Why? Because omega-6 is very unstable. It's very prone to reactions, while omega-3, not so much. So if you've eaten a bunch of foods that are very rich in omega-6, and you go out into the sun and you sunbathe because you've heard that it's a good thing to do, or you just want to tan, and you can't tan, you burn. Why is that? Well, it's because you have a bunch of omega-6 in your skin that's going to react immediately because of the UV that carries a lot of energy and causes chemical reactions to happen. You've got an environment that will cause UVB to create a bunch of havoc. Well, if you take a healthy person who eats whole foods devoid of omega-6, they eat a lot of saturated animal fats, preferably raw, what happens? They'll tan in the sun. I haven't ever seen a single person who is on a nutrient-dense diet who can't tan. They all tan very beautifully in the sun. That is one of the most significant changes that they experience in relation to the sun, because the fatty acid composition in their skin changes, and this is something that is not talked about enough. Now, if you want a real-life example, first there's this picture. Read this. This is an amazing thing. And then look at this picture. Now, what do you think the difference between this guy's father and the truck driver is? Truck drivers are generally overweight. Not all of them, of course, but they're generally overweight. They live unhealthy lifestyles, while this guy's father seems to be a very healthy guy. He was out on a run with his son, so it seems as though this guy is a very healthy man. Now, please focus on the task at hand. Don't look up this person too much, but there's Jenny Scordamalia. Okay, she runs the TV channel Miami TV, and to my knowledge, she's a nudist who lives in Tulum in Mexico, so a pretty high UV area, and she's naked, and to my knowledge she's pretty health conscious, and she doesn't use sunscreen. I believe she said before that she doesn't use sunscreen, but I can't remember where. So look at her skin. Okay, she's out in the sun a lot. Okay, she's a proponent of sunbathing and, you know, being in nature. Look at her skin. Does she have aging skin? No, she has very beautiful skin actually. The omega-6 to 3 ratio is one aspect to it. There's also regeneration ability and pollution. So let's start with pollution. You have seen how drug users look, right? They get a bunch of skin problems. Now, if we look at a normal person, they don't usually have these skin problems, while a drug user does. The difference between these two is that one person is taking drugs, the other person is not. And the other difference is this guy's getting skin issues. So why is that? Why is the skin affected by drugs? Well, usually pollution leaves through the skin. So if you're introducing a lot of pollution, your body has to clear out more. And since the nature of the drugs that most people take is very toxic, like we're not talking about some cleanly produced pharmaceutical, which is still bad, but it's not as bad as what's produced on the street. Since most people are taking things that are produced on the street, they get these big sores on their skin. Now, why is that? Well, that's because stuff is leaving through the skin. Now, hopefully you're not a drug user, but what's happening to you as well is toxins are accumulating below the skin. Remember, in modern society, we're exposed to all kinds of things, and these things need to be dealt with by our bodies. They can't just circulate around the blood. When you get a whiff of some toxic perfume, you know, some cancer-causing ingredient in there, and that goes into the bloodstream through the air that came into your nose, then it went into the lungs, and then that goes into the bloodstream. It can't just stay there. It has to be detoxified. It has to go to the liver to be turned into something else. It has to go and be stored somewhere if there is a capacity for it to be stored somewhere, which there usually is. This might be the fat, this might be the bones. And so over time, these toxins accumulate in the skin and they're stored in the fat cells. So what happens if we suddenly have a bunch of high energy photons coming in and hitting this dysfunctional skin that has a very bad fat composition, and maybe not just a bad fat composition but also pollution? Stuff is going to happen. The process doesn't work because pollution is disrupting the process. And if the process that turns this photon into something useful is disrupted, then usually this high energy photon that we get from UV will do something negative instead. Next, we've got regeneration ability. And what I mean is, how fast can your skin regenerate? Now, why does it need to regenerate? Well, because UV does kill some of the skin cells. That will happen. It does damage the skin if you get too much of it. But this too much stuff, this skin damage stuff, you have to compare that to exercise to understand why this isn't a very bad process. Now, if you do exercise, you will get muscle cell damage, okay? You'll damage your muscles. And if you do too much exercise, you might get some other really big problem, right? Because you can't recover from the muscle damage. You know, you can't get rhabdomyolysis, you know, your kidneys can't handle all the stuff that's being broken down by the muscles, and so you start bleeding from your genitals. It's the same with UV. You have something that's being damaged, and you have something that thus needs to be healed. With exercise, it's the same. But you have to understand that in modern society, people have a bunch of pollution in their bodies, and they have a very, very bad fat composition in their skin because of the dietary fat that they're eating. Again, the perception that the public has is that saturated fat and cholesterol and animal foods are unhealthy, so they eat the most reactive fats instead. Again, the animal fats are the most stable fats. Saturated fat is the most stable, high energy type of fat because it's fully saturated. Remember, if you add hydrogens to something or you remove oxygen from something, you're reducing it, you're adding electrons. You're giving it more potential energy, so to speak, if you want to compare physics to chemistry. If you add oxygen or you remove hydrogen, you're oxidizing something. And oxidizing something means you're taking the electrons from it, you're taking the energy from it, practically speaking. The difference between saturated fat and unsaturated fat is that the saturated fatty acid, because you can have the same fatty acid but in a saturated or unsaturated state, if we're comparing them in terms of how many carbons they have. The difference is that this guy doesn't have a double bond. This guy's fully saturated. He has a bunch of hydrogens, the other guy doesn't have any hydrogens. So when that stuff is in the skin, and sunlight hits it, it's going to react more quickly. Omega-6 is more reactive than saturated fat. So this isn't just about, is UV dangerous or is UV not dangerous? It's about how much can you tolerate. If you're dark skinned, you can tolerate more. And what's your regeneration ability? How is your skin quality in general? Because in some cases, you might have to do some lifestyle modifications first. You might even need to ease into the sun bathing a little bit so that you expose yourself to UV but not so much UV, so that you tan a little bit. So then when you go and sunbathe again, when the UV is higher, your skin is a little bit darker. Again, it's a bell-shaped curve. You need a certain amount of UV. If you go over that amount, you're going to get problems. The best way to know if you're getting too much UV is to observe the skin. If it's getting darker, that's all right, that's fine. If it's getting red, you might be getting too much. You might want to end it there for that sunbathing session. A person who usually burns in the sun, if they work with me, if I sit and lecture them and they do everything I say, they will not burn in the sun anymore. Or they will increase their sun tolerance by a lot. That's what I'm trying to tell you. This is something that isn't just genetic. It's something that is subject to change. And the people who burn easily in modern society, they're unfortunately a product of the modern lifestyle. They're not supposed to be like that. They're supposed to tan. Again, if you can't create melanin, you have a problem. Even then you might be thinking, well, UV isn't necessary. I can take a vitamin D supplement and everything's all right. Well, if I can prove to you that that's not the case, that you need to get UV for vitamin D, and that the only way to get vitamin D in a good manner is through the sun, then maybe we can change your mind. First, you have to understand vitamin D levels. So anything below 60 millimoles per liter, I'd say is deficient. It's not looking good. Between 60 and 70, you're hanging on. Above 70, you're pretty alright, but it's not optimal. Above 100, you're doing well. Above 125, you're reaching optimal levels. I'm very happy for you. 150, that is when you're optimal. If you have levels that are above 150, you're optimal. But very, very, very few people have levels that are above 150. Now, to reach 125 millimoles per liter, according to science, according to research, you need 9,122 IUs. Now, this begs a question. Well, the RDA is around 800 IUs, something like that. It's either 600, 800, 1000, something like that. So how could it be that to reach optimal levels, you need 9,122? Well, it's because the RDA is wrong, unfortunately. You have to realize that when it comes to our understanding of health, there are nutrients that are, let's say, in natural foods that we don't know of, that we haven't identified. You see, the vitamins are all chemicals, okay? And we've called them vitamins. We call this thing vitamin this, vitamin that. B12 is cobalamin, B3 is riboflavin, B1 is thiamine. You could remove the label vitamin, or you could add it to, for example, choline. Some add it to choline, but others just call it choline. Some say folate, some say B9, and so on and so forth. These are names that we've given to things, and for the most part, there are probably a bunch of things in meat and liver and maybe connective tissue of animals, and maybe even some things in plants that are very beneficial to us, that make us feel much, much better, that we haven't identified yet. My point is that we make mistakes, and it is very clear from the evidence that we do have that the RDA should be above 9,000. It should be 10,000 IUs. Another thing is that when it comes to these vitamin and mineral levels, what the government cares about is that you're above the minimum threshold, that you're going to function fine. They don't care about every citizen being at the absolute optimal range. But you're here with me, and I want you to be optimal, so of course my recommendations are going to be based on what's optimal. And again, it's been proven time and time again that people who have very high vitamin D levels, so we're talking optimal levels, 150 millimoles per liter, they have far less disease than most people. They have a far lower risk of dying than most people. So seriously, vitamin D is not something small, it's a very, very big thing. And you want to know something? 50% of the world is deficient, as I said before. So our goal is to get 10,000 IUs a day. How do we get them? Well, we have three options in the modern world. We can be in the sun when the UV index is high, because the higher the UV index, the more UVB you're getting, and the more UVB you're getting, the more vitamin D you're creating. And we'll get into how vitamin D is created in a moment. Or you can take it as a supplement, or you can get it from food. So let's look at the options. Well, let's start with food. Can you get it from food? Well, it's very hard, because usually when we look at nutrients, we'll find them in many foods. There are many options. Like if we take B12, you can eat eggs, you can eat dairy and meat, and you'll get B12. There's not a big problem there. With choline and folate, you get that from liver. As long as you include liver, you're getting those. But with vitamin D, specifically vitamin D3, you don't really get it from food. You've got D2 in mushrooms and some algae that they use for vegan supplements, but D2 isn't the version that our body uses. We use D3, okay? D3 is where it's at. D3 is in animal foods, but in very, very small amounts. We're talking less than 100 IUs. The only food that truly is fairly high in vitamin D is cod liver oil, or cod liver in general. But even then, a few tablespoons will give you 1,000 IUs. And the problem is, with liver, you're getting a huge amount of vitamin A. And you can't just rely on cod liver because of that. Because you're going to get too much vitamin A. You're going to get nutrient imbalances. You're not supposed to get that much vitamin A. So, vitamin A is also an antagonist to vitamin D. So the more vitamin A you consume, the lower your vitamin D gets. Which means that if you're eating a food that's very high in vitamin A and vitamin D, the vitamin A will outshine the vitamin D, and the net effect will be smaller than what you're seeing in terms of how much vitamin D there is in the food. Keep in mind that out of all the food that we know of, cod liver oil has the absolute highest amount of vitamin D. So it can be used for people who are, let's say, in the northern hemisphere for extra vitamin D during the colder months. They can rely on it for getting, let's say, 1,000 IUs per day. But as you can clearly see, it's not enough to stay in the optimal range. So then we move on to supplements, because we can't be optimal just through food. We need sunlight or supplements. We haven't figured that out yet. There was a study done on vitamin D supplementation and bone mineral density. And what they found is that out of the 3 groups that took a certain amount of vitamin D, each one taking more vitamin D than the other, the ones who were taking 10,000 IUs in supplement form had the worst bone mineral density. Can you imagine that? So to maintain optimal vitamin D levels, you need approximately 9,122 plus IUs every day. These guys were supplementing approximately that amount, and they had worse outcomes in relation to those who were taking less in supplement form. Then there's this study. 2 groups of Indian men. The first group sunbathe for 20 minutes midday every day. The other group take 1,000 IUs of a vitamin D3 supplement. At the end of the study, they found that those taking the supplement had higher serum levels of vitamin D. So when they checked their blood, they had higher vitamin D levels in the blood. The other group had far lower cholesterol levels. So those in the sun, they had lower cholesterol levels, while the guys who were taking the vitamin D3 supplement, their LDL levels shot up. Now why is that? Well, because to make vitamin D, you do it from cholesterol. You do it from 7-dehydrocholesterol. This also means, if they have very high LDL levels, that they're probably not utilizing the D3 very well. And the reason I'm concluding that is based on the other study, where those taking 10,000 IUs had the worst outcomes, where they were taking a bunch of vitamin D, but it wasn't leading to anything good, which means that the signal that the vitamin D3 was making was bad. So scientifically speaking, vitamin D3 supplementation doesn't seem to work, or at least it seems to have problems. Another problem with vitamin D3 supplementation is that to get the D3 into a pill, you have to chemically process something. Have you thought about that? That you have to chemically process something to get the D3 into the pill. How are you supposed to get D3 into a pill when it's created by sunlight, by cholesterol in an animal's skin interacting with sunlight? Well, what they do is they extract it from sheep's wool using hexane, which is a very toxic, cancer-causing solvent. You also have the additives, so the pollution that might be in it. You have the contamination, the hexane residues, and then of course you've also got the cost. It costs money while sunlight is free. Now what's the explanation for all of this? How can we explain what's happening here? Well, the explanation comes from Jack Kruse. Dr. Jack Kruse. You already know who that is. The fact of the matter is that the D3 doesn't work without the UV. Okay? You need the energy that comes from the UV for the D3 to work. Okay? And this is in the field of quantum biology. This is pretty complicated. But D3 is a measure of the amount of UV light energy that's in your tissues. You emit UV light intercellularly. So your cells emit UV light, they create UV light. And sunlight helps you store that energy, that light energy. And D3 doesn't work without it, okay? It's not that D3 doesn't work without it, but it gives your body a false measure. It's telling your body that we have created this D3 through this light energy that we do have. But if you take it through a supplement, you're saying that we have created this energy, but we didn't get the light. Okay, you didn't actually get the light, but you're telling your body that you did get the light. And you need that light to function optimally. Looking at our 3 options, we know that supplements do not work because you don't have the light energy there. It's like doing business with people on the basis that you have a certain amount of money, but you don't actually have that money. So you're tricking the body into thinking that it has done something that it hasn't done. You're giving it a signal that isn't deserved, so to speak, so you're going to get problems. With food, you don't have the same problem, because for that food to exist, the energy had to come from the sun, at least the food that humans eat. There are organisms that don't need sun. But for the most part, the things we eat are dependent on the sun, the energy that they inhabit came from the sun. So they've already done the work for that D3. So when we eat them, the energy that we get in conjunction with the D3, that's all right, no problems. The problem with food isn't that, you have a photonic energy problem, a signaling mismatch. The problem is that there's not enough D3 there. Again, you're not going to get 10,000 IUs in a day. Never. Impossible. Unless you overdose on vitamin A through cod liver oil. Going back to sunlight, it seems to be the perfect option. It is the obvious option from a biological perspective. You look at how humans function, you look at our options, sunlight is the clear option, okay? And when it comes to UV, it's a bell-shaped curve, okay? So this is a bell. Imagine a line that's like a bell, like this. On this axis, on the x-axis, we have the amount of UV. So here we have a lot of UV, here we have no UV. They have the same health effect. This, on the y-axis, is the health effect. So the higher we go, you see, on the bell, the better the health. And here we have a moderate amount of UV, or let's say the UV that you do need. You go above that, you start getting diminishing returns. Not diminishing returns, but bad returns. Okay, it goes downhill. Your health effects go downhill. No UV, you're already downhill. You never went up. You get enough UV, bam, you don't need any more. How do you know that you're getting enough UV? Okay, how do you know that you've been in the sun for the optimal amount of time? Your body will tell you. Just like it tells you that it's hungry, just like it tells you that you need to sleep, it will tell you if it wants to be in the sun or not. Your skin will start feeling a little bit itchy. It will, turn a little bit red. Even if you're at the equator and the UV index is 16, it's super, super high. All you need to do in that case is go in the shade. Just shield yourself from the sun and that's it. That's the end of the story. You got the UV that you do need. I've found what works for me. Usually, I go out when it's UV anywhere from 5 to 7. I sunbathe for approximately 2 hours. I don't use any sunscreen, not even natural sunscreen. All I've found that is really good for me is putting beef tallow on my face, because the skin on your face is more sensitive than the rest of the body. I never get anything bad on the rest of my body, but I can get a little bit of skin dryness from the sun if it's hitting my face. So I use beef tallow on my face, and I've found that removes any harmful effects of UV. And by doing my own protocol, being in the sun when the UV is fairly high at noon, being outside for 1 to 2 hours, sunbathing for that amount of time, with most of your body exposed, you're getting at least 10K IUs, might even be 20K up to 40K. The more you're in the sun, the more IUs you get. But we're talking about huge amounts in relation to the RDA. Based on the average natural amount of UVB that we get when we're outside in a natural setting, we're getting 10K, 20K, 30K, 40K IUs. That should be the RDA for optimal health. Jack Kruse says that when you reach a level above, let's say 125, 150 millimoles per liter, approximately, your body starts storing D3. It starts storing huge amounts of D3. Okay, so we have a storage capacity for D3, but you only get that if you consistently hit the optimal RDA, so to speak. Sure, those were solid explanations, but do they hold up in the real world? When we try to look at people who get lots of UV, do they have better outcomes? How is it with skin cancer? So first of all, Australia has very high skin cancer rates. That is true. They're also the ones who consume the most seed oils in the world. Remember that. So their fat composition in the skin is very, very bad. Okay? It's really bad. And the more seed oils you consume, the worse outcomes in skin cancer you're going to have. Another thing that's very interesting is that according to Jack Kruse and Georgi Dinkov, melanoma, so the worst form of skin cancer, usually occurs on places that haven't been exposed to the sun.
The vaccine for melanoma, the vaccine for skin cancer, is UV light. It's on the surface, it sounds so crazy.
Yeah.
Until you understand what I told you in the last hour and 40 minutes.
Suffice to say, the melanoma patients that I've encountered in the clinic and in the emergency department, I took a detailed history from them, and overwhelmingly, they didn't go in the sun. They were overweight. They
That's the fastest way to get melanoma.
Yeah, they had
That's the reason why people in Australia have it.
yeah.
You guys stick out like a sore thumb.
So anywhere you can think of that would never be exposed to the sun, those are the places where you'd see melanoma. And Jack Kruse's theory is that, well, it comes up and it's very dark, okay? And it wants light. It's actually there because it wants light. It's dark, it absorbs a lot of light. It goes up to the surface of the skin and it grows over there so that it can get more light, because that tissue is extremely light deficient. That's why that cancer develops over there. Regardless of whether you like Jack Kruse's explanation or not, this is what we're seeing with melanoma. It is occurring in places where the sun isn't hitting the skin. It's occurring in places that don't get sun exposure. So, in my mind, when I heard this, what I realized was that it's dangerous to not sunbathe naked because you want to hit all areas. Okay, so find a way to sunbathe naked so that you don't get melanoma on your ass cheeks. I want to show you another real-life example that is epidemiology, but it's still absolutely fantastic because the relationship is undeniable. So here you've got latitude plotted against the cancer rate of a country. So a latitude is, let's say this is the equator. That's a latitude. That's latitude number 0. You can go below that, let's say over here. That's latitude minus 20. Or 20 south, or whatever you want to call it. And then in Sweden, in Stockholm at least, we're at 59. So we're at latitude 59. These two charts are showing the latitude in relation to the country's rate of breast cancer for this chart and colorectal cancer for this chart. And if you don't know what colorectal cancer is, it's basically colon cancer. So what we're seeing here is that the lower the latitude, so the closer it is to the equator, and of course, the closer you get to the equator, the higher the UV, the more UVB light people are going to be exposed to on average, the lower the rates of cancer for breast cancer and for colorectal cancer in this case. What's astonishing here is that these Nordic countries, which have good water quality, have good access to food, have good healthcare, which isn't really healthcare, but you know what I mean, they've got everything in check, very good air quality, low pesticide usage. Many of the factors in the Nordic countries are perfect health-wise. What they don't have is a lot of sun. And what we find here is that their colorectal cancer and their breast cancer is far higher on the chart than third world countries near the equator. And these third world countries usually have bad air quality. They have more pesticide usage. They have worse access to high quality food, far worse healthcare systems, many things that seem to be against them in terms of health, yet they have lower rates of these two cancers. At least we can say that. The scientific explanation is D3 levels. Near the equator, you've got better weather all year round, you've got sunlight all year round, you've got more UVB. On average, the people get more UVB, so they have higher D3 levels. They get more D3 than the Nordic countries, and D3 is one of the best things for preventing cancer. Your cancer risk goes way down if you have very good D3 levels. And yes, vitamin D3 is absolutely amazing in this regard. It's a necessary thing for health, which means automatically, by the nature of that fact, that UVB is completely necessary for human health based on what we've discussed in this video. But the thing is, D3 is not the real treasure. It's a byproduct of the treasure. Sunlight does far more than just give you D3, and they're getting all of these benefits every single day. Now, I've presented theories from a very knowledgeable neurosurgeon, Jack Kruse. I've shown you research that is very convincing, but you still have the problem of not being able to tolerate the sun. Let me tell you a quick story. I used to be like this. I used to go out in the sun, and my parents used to give me sunscreen because, you know, if I was outside for too long, I'd get a sunburn. Whenever we went on a vacation, I used to get sunscreen slathered on me by my parents, and I still would get a sunburn. Okay? I would always be reactive to the sun. When I started eating this way, when I started eating more high-quality raw animal foods in general, I cleaned up any pollution that was in my environment. You know, I changed my toothpaste. I didn't use toxic soaps, no toxic shampoo, no toxic this and that. All of this changed. I started tanning. My sunlight tolerance went up drastically in 2020 because I had already been on a very, very good diet for many months at that time. And it takes just a few months to build up your sun tolerance to the level I'm talking about, unless you have some hard to deal with pre-existing condition. But for most people, they don't have that. The number one thing to tackle, and the thing that gives people the most trouble, is the fat that they eat, okay? If you still think that saturated fat is dangerous, you have another problem. You need to tackle that. You haven't understood that entire thing. Saturated fat, I'll go over it shortly. Saturated fat is deemed dangerous for your heart because there's a direct correlation between eating more fat, especially saturated fat, and LDL levels. So cholesterol levels, bad cholesterol levels. LDL is not cholesterol. It is the protein that carries cholesterol from the liver to your cells. So it is absolutely necessary. Having higher levels means that you can transport more cholesterol from the liver to the cells. There is no correlation between LDL and heart disease. In fact, the best graph we have is this graph. And as you can see, when you have what doctors would say dangerously high LDL levels, you don't have a very high risk of dying. In this study, it was shown that centenarians usually have high cholesterol levels, not low cholesterol levels. So having high LDL levels is protective, while having low LDL levels is bad. Centenarians, the people who live the longest, they have high cholesterol levels, which should be enough evidence to suggest that saturated fat, which is linked to higher LDL, is a healthy thing. Let's throw you in a natural setting. Temperature isn't an issue, the weather is good. You're in nature and let's say you have an axe and you know how to survive there. What kinds of fat will you eat? Okay, because whatever you conjure up is what indigenous people would eat. That's what they have access to, right? Indigenous people live in nature, so they have access to the foods that are around them. It's the same with you in this experiment. So what would they eat? Would they eat olive oil? No. Would they eat rapeseed oil? No. Sunflower oil? No. Avocado? No. Coconut oil? Maybe if they had coconuts, sure. Would it be a lot? No. Would they go the entire way and make coconut oil from the flesh, or would they just eat the flesh? Maybe they'd just eat the flesh. Would you have access to animal fat? Yes, of course you would. Actually, that's the most logical and obvious fat source that you would have access to in any scenario where you would be in nature, in any scenario where any indigenous human would be in nature. Again, how are you going to get your fat-soluble vitamins? The coconut doesn't contain all of them, but animal fat does. So even if you were to eat coconut, you wouldn't get enough nutrition. You would need the animal fat. I mean, the experiment is all around you. People are eating a bunch of processed fats, vegetable oils. What's happening to them? Over the long haul, we're getting more incidence of heart disease. That's what we're getting. 100 years ago, when we didn't have these things, there was barely any need for the EKG, okay, the machine that looks at the heart, measures how it's working. There was no need for that. The guy who invented it sold the patent for like $2. Historically speaking, anthropologically speaking, biologically speaking, chemically speaking, physically speaking, all of these suggest that eating saturated animal fat is the way to go to not get disease. Why am I telling you all of this? Because if you focus on animal foods and you avoid all the processed foods, you're going to tan. Trust me. Think of it like this. You need enough resources, in this case amino acids, to allocate toward the production of melanin. If you're unhealthy, you need those amino acids for other things. Usually you're healthy if you have enough resources, and you have enough resources if there's no need to supply these amino acids somewhere because you've damaged something severely because of some toxin or something, and you're getting enough resources through your mouth. Okay, so eat animal foods and avoid the unhealthy things, and you'll be able to produce melanin. That's what I'm trying to tell you. The last thing I will say about this is that there needs to be a UV progression. So what people in Sweden do is, April comes around, sometimes we have sunny days in April, people don't go out in the sun. They don't. May comes around, it's pretty sunny, people don't go out. They don't go to the beach because the water is cold. They don't sunbathe, they don't do anything. June comes around, and let's say in the middle of June, the first really good sunny day comes around. Then they go to the beach. The water is still cold, but they want to go to the beach because, 9 months of winter really does things to you. And that's the first time they sunbathe, and the UV, let's say, is 4 or 5. They're going to get burnt. You had to start as soon as the sun came out. As soon as there was an opportunity to sunbathe, you had to do that. Because you have to prime your skin. You have to start with UV 1 or 2, then you go to 3, then you go to 4, then you go to 5, and then you go to 6. You do a few sessions at 4 or 5, ideally, then you go to 5, 6, and 7. Okay? You prime your skin, you build up the melanin from early on. You don't just jump to 10, you don't do that. You have to prime your skin, especially if you're white. I am completely white. I'm born completely white. I'm Snow White, okay? But I tan well because I really think about what I'm doing. I think about the time I spend in the sun. I listen to my skin very closely, and I eat very well. That's advice for light-skinned people. Not the nutrition stuff, but the priming your skin stuff. If you're in Norway, if you're in Sweden, Canada, Finland, Denmark, Northern Europe, Central Europe, the northern part of the US, Russia, you need to get out of there if you have dark skin. Go closer to the equator, because if you have dark skin, you need far more sunlight, and you can't afford, health-wise, long-term, to live 9 months of the year without getting sunlight. You'll develop problems far faster than anyone else. So if you're very dark-skinned, my advice to you is try to move somewhere closer to the equator for long-term health. That will be a very, very good investment for your health long-term. So you avoid getting cancer or any big chronic disease. Because even if your nutrition stuff is perfect, because you have very dark skin, and because you're not getting sunlight, because you're in Canada, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Central Europe, Russia, Northern US, you will get problems. You will get health problems, and you'll never be completely healthy. Now we need to discuss sunscreen. Sunscreen is pretty unnecessary because all it does is block UV. So think about it like this. If it is advertised that a sunscreen blocks 99.9% of UV rays, then it's blocking 99.9% of all the vitamin D you're supposed to get. You understand? If you're blocking all the UVB that would be creating vitamin D if it were to hit your skin, then you're not going to get any vitamin D. I once told this to someone in a parallel class in high school, and they said, no, that can't be true. And then I explained, no, UVB hits 7-dehydrocholesterol and sunscreen blocks UV. I repeat, all sunscreen does is block UV. And usually that's a bad thing because of the bell-shaped curve. It keeps you over here. You're afraid of being over here, but you're missing the point, which is being over here for optimal health. Okay? This amount of UV exposure is good, this amount is bad. But if you put sunscreen on, you get 0, which means you get the same results health-wise as burning yourself. And in fact, as we discussed previously, 50% of the population of Earth is vitamin D deficient, while 0.1% have health problems due to excess UV. What should you do in a scenario where you're going to be outside for a very long time, but you don't want to worry about the UV? The UV index is going to be very high and you don't want to get burned. What should you do? Well, the obvious answer for most people is use sunscreen. The reason they think about it in this way is because they only see the positive side of sunscreen. They don't see any problems. The only way to evaluate something is if we have the whole picture of how it affects us. Most people don't. Now, what am I talking about? Read the back of the closest sunscreen bottle near you, or go into the internet and search for sunscreen, and then press any link, then read the ingredients. Now tell me, would you eat those things? Would you eat the sunscreen? Would you take a sunscreen bottle and put a little bit in your mouth and swallow it? No, obviously you wouldn't, because you know that it's toxic. Now, why would you put it on your skin then? You have to realize that it's been scientifically proven that the ingredients in sunscreen are absorbed transdermally. They're absorbed through the skin, which means that whatever it is that you put on your skin, sunscreen-wise, you're going to get that inside of you. Just like if you were to eat it. It's just that instead of it going through your digestive tract and into the bloodstream, it's going through your skin. This is a distinction that modern society doesn't make, and that's why they use makeup, skincare products, deodorants, whatever it might be, because they don't realize that these things seep into the body. They do. That's how our skin works. It eats. It's the outside of the digestive tract. If you follow the anus in and then out of the mouth, you realize that this skin is directly linked to your digestive tract. And so that entire system is what absorbs stuff. It's the same system. According to MIT senior research scientist Stephanie Seneff, sunscreen is toxic because it contains aluminum. And when you put aluminum on your skin, it gets absorbed into you. And there are numerous studies showing that aluminum is toxic. That's a well-known thing. Aluminum is something that is toxic to human beings. So if you put sunscreen that has aluminum in it on your skin, you're going to get a big dose of neurotoxicity into you. During the last few years, there have been many trials that have tested the safety of main ingredients in sunscreen, and what they found is that they're all toxic. Usually they leave these companies alone so that they can profit, but in this case the public is being protected, thankfully. The chemicals in question, according to the EWG, are octacrylene, oxybenzone, octisalate, homosalate, and avobenzone. According to EWG and the studies they present, a few weeks after you use these sunscreens, you will find concentrations of these ingredients inside of your body. They stay. And the only reason they stay is because they're absorbed through the skin and into the organs, and then the organs try to eliminate them. That's why they're found in the urine, that's why they're found in the blood, because they're going to the kidneys, they're going to the liver, and you're trying to pee them out. That's what's happening. And meanwhile, the entire process of them going into you and then going out, that's when the damage occurs. And another thing that's really funny is, I'm in Sweden, and according to the article, EU is much stricter than the US when it comes to these things. And they've already been restricting these ingredients. And I went down and I looked at the sunscreen that we have, that my family has. Thankfully, they don't use it a lot. And the second largest ingredient, percentage-wise, after water, was octacrylene. Okay, octacrylene, and I'm in Sweden. So don't think that this is some US stuff. The alternative that I've found to be the best is using nothing. And if you need to monitor your UV because you've got sensitive skin, then monitor it by not being in the sun when you feel like your skin has gotten enough. Now, if you want a natural alternative, there are natural UV blockers. You can use clay, but if you don't want to use clay, this is not necessarily something that blocks UV, but it does give the skin enough nutrients to offset the damage a lot because it will regenerate faster. My alternative is beef tallow, and beef tallow doesn't block UV. What it does is it increases your regeneration ability drastically. When you give the skin a bunch of vitamin E, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin K, and a bunch of minerals, you're giving it something that it can work with whenever it gets damaged. So when I put beef tallow on my face and I'm in the sun, I don't feel anything bad happening to my face whatsoever. So beef tallow is a very good alternative. However, the best protection is melanin. Okay, getting a tan is the best protection. Being dark, even better protection. In modern society, people look at a sunburned person and they say, oh, you're going to get skin cancer. At least this happened to me. I've only gotten sunburnt, which wasn't really a bad sunburn. It was just a little bit of redness one time. It was 4 years ago, and it was because I sunbathed with a girl for 4 to 5 hours. That's why. I come home that day, my mother sees me and she gets scared. She says, you're going to get skin cancer. Obviously, I'm not going to get skin cancer, but she's thinking that what you just did will increase your risk of getting skin cancer. I tell her there's nothing to worry about. I told her that because I instinctively understood what this sunburn was. It was skin damage, and the reason for the redness is because there was an extra amount of blood being pumped into there because of the skin damage, because the skin is healing itself. There's inflammation, and that's a good process because without inflammation, your cells would die, but there would be no signal saying that we need to repair the damage. Inflammation is the repair process, and that's why it's a good thing. Now, inflammation is bad in the health circles because there's a reason for the inflammation, and they're trying to remove the reason for the inflammation. And usually, if you have chronic inflammation, it is due to something you're doing or something that's in your environment that is pretty bad. In this case, you can perfectly handle it. I'm not saying that you should get red, but I'm saying that a slight amount of redness is alright. If all I just described is actually what's happening in the skin, then where does the skin cancer come from? Well, the skin cancer comes out of the places that haven't been exposed to the sun. And the places that have been exposed to the sun are the places that will potentially get a sunburn. So it seems as though, scientifically speaking, the notion of UV and thus a sunburn giving you skin cancer or increasing the risk of you getting skin cancer is completely unfounded. With that said, the body knows what it can take. When you start getting a little bit red, a little bit itchy, a little bit uncomfortable, get out of the sun. You've gotten enough UV for that day. Don't do what I did. I was there for a longer period of time because there was a girl there. I was distracted because I'm a monkey, or I was a monkey 4 years ago. Nowadays, I never go past the point of a little bit of redness. As soon as I see a little bit of redness on my arms or my chest, I go out of the sun. And when I have a deeper tan, I don't even get the redness. I hope that answers the question of whether you should grill yourself or not. Now the interesting thing is that Jack Kruse says that getting slightly red, getting slightly pinkish is a good thing because it's an indicator of you having gotten a bunch of vitamin D, a bunch of sunlight, all those benefits. Now is he right about this? Because it seems as though this redness, this pinkishness, is due to damage having been caused to the skin. It's inflammation. What I'll tell you is very interesting. The only time I got sunburned 4 years ago with that girl, yes, I got red. Sure, after a few days, that turned into the darkest, deepest tan I had ever had, which was really interesting. So yes, I got red, but I also produced far more melanin than usual. Now we're going to discuss your light environment, and I'm going to explain it in a way that you've never heard before. But before that, please realize that I've focused all my efforts on UV and sunlight for most of this video because public opinion about this needs to change. If you stumble upon a person who says that UV is bad, please send them this video because it might change their mind. What I'm going to say about your light environment is this. Imagine that we have a lion, and the lion only eats meat and organs. And when you change his diet, he suffers. It's the same with sunlight. When you change the lion's source of light, he also suffers. So imagine, if we make this more personal, that you subsist off of one food, let's say it's meat, and if we ever change your diet, you're going to be suboptimal health-wise. You really feel well when you only eat meat. Imagine that your light diet is the same way, but instead of meat we have the sun. The only light source that you work optimally on is the sun. Whenever you introduce some other light source, you will work less optimally. So if you want complete mastery of the light pillar of health, the only light you should be exposed to is the light that comes from the sun. So if the sun goes down, no light, only from the moon and the stars, or a little bit of fire, sure, but even the fire might mess up your circadian rhythm because red light doesn't do what blue light does, but it does still affect you, but not by a lot. But you live in modern society, so you need guidelines for modern society. And what I recommend here is seeing it this way. Darkness is S tier. Why is that? Because darkness is created by having no light source. And so in daytime, you don't need to turn on any light, which means that you're getting light from the sun. Even if you're inside, all the light that's in this room right now is coming from the sun, except the little light that's coming from the screen from my iPhone. So when the sun sets and it's dark in your house, you're doing perfectly because the sun is the only light source you're being exposed to. So you're doing everything perfectly. Darkness is SS plus tier. Why? Because the sunlight and you are a closed system. The sun regulates your circadian rhythm. If you add another light source, you get problems because suddenly that light is changing the way your body perceives the environment. It thinks there is something there that's actually a human invention. It's not there, it's not coming from the sun, and you're supposed to be tuned to the sun. At B tier we have red light, because you're introducing something, but it's not affecting your circadian rhythm that much. It still messes with it, but not by a lot. Then at D tier you have anything that is devoid of blue light. So you can have something that has red light and green light, which would be something that's very warm in its color, but it's not optimal. Remember that green light also messes up your circadian rhythm. It's not just blue light. Blue light is not the only enemy, it's the entire light spectrum, and it's the intensity of the light spectrum, and we'll get to that. So if we follow this logic of darkness, then red light, then something devoid of blue light, then the best option would actually be to not use a screen, because screens emit light. Okay? Screens emit light. So if you use them, you're not following the darkness rule. You're not doing the absolute perfect thing that you could do. If you want to use a screen when the sun sets, which I usually do, you can put it on 100% red light. So if you go to color filters, instead of using the blue light filter option, you can go to color filters on your phone and you can make the screen 100% red. That means that you've eliminated 100% of the blue light and 100% of the green light. You only have red light left. Ideally, that's the best option, and then the third best option is to just eliminate the blue light. So the screen will sort of look yellowish, orangish. It's not optimal. Being red is much better, but at least you're removing the blue light, and the blue light is going to affect your circadian rhythm the most. On the computer, you have flux, but you have to enable a certain setting that gives you the entire range of settings so that you can go really red. It's not 100% red. The iPhone and the phones in general do this much better. Flux doesn't do it in a good manner. It goes down pretty well, but it doesn't eliminate 100% of it like the iPhone does. But on Linux, you've got Redshift. Flux is pretty hard to install on Linux, so on Linux you've got Redshift, and you use the terminal in Linux, and you can put it at 1000. And that's sort of optimal because it's 100% red. It goes more red than Flux. Based on what you've just heard, you should be thinking about blue light blocking glasses. Not because you should buy them, but you should question if they're the best thing in the world. They're actually at B tier, because remember what we said. If you block blue light and green light, and you only have red light, that's B tier. The best tier is darkness, and if you have darkness, there's no need for blue light blocking glasses because there's no blue light. Now that's optimal blue light blocking glasses. You've also got those that don't block green light. They're the ones that are pretty orangish, yellowish. Those only block blue light. That's why you see orange, yellow, because they don't block green light. If you block green light and blue light, all you see is red. Now I really want you to focus because I'm going to make a very important point. If you go into a dark forest, so it's pitch black at night, and you've only got stars and there's no moon, and you're in there, can you see or can you not see? You can see. You can navigate that forest. Humans have that ability. We have some night vision. Not as good as some other animals, but we do have that ability. We certainly have that ability. You can try that out for yourself. I'm speaking from personal experience, of course. That's the only way for me to verify that I can see at night. If you're there and you can see, that means the visible light spectrum is still there, okay? You're still seeing blue light. There's still blue light there. Otherwise, everything would be red. However, the difference between daytime and nighttime is the intensity, okay? So when it comes to circadian biology and light in general, is it the specific wavelength that is important in terms of sleep, or is it the intensity? Because I would argue that the intensity is far more important than the specifics of the light spectrum, because that doesn't really change from daytime to nighttime. Everything still looks the same, but it's darker. The biggest change is the intensity, which means that if you have really strong red lights, you have a problem. If you have very dim red lights, that's good. If you have even more dim red lights, that's better than the guy that has normal red lights. You see what I mean here? The more dim it is, the better. The lower the brightness on your screen, the better. The intensity of the light is really important. So what I would suggest in terms of blue light blocking glasses is actually the darkest sunglasses you can get. Those will make you sleep much faster because they mimic the environment that a human would be in if the sun sets. Darkness. And remember, if you look at the moon is white, and this is something I learned from Jack Cruz because I've been thinking about this. Well, if blue light is bad and the moon is white, well, you need the blue spectrum to make white light. To see white light, you need blue in there, you need red in there, you need everything to make white. You're reflecting everything, and that's why you see it as a white moon. And so in the full moon, the moon is emitting blue light, but it doesn't really affect your sleep. It can, if you stare at it for too long, but still, it's blue light, but you're not being affected by it that much. Why? Because it's not that strong. So I'm going to suggest two protocols. One is for those who want absolute optimal health, and the other one is for anyone living in modern society. So for the beginner who lives in modern society, which is me currently, and you, because we have screens in front of us right now. I am recording on one and you're watching on one. You do morning sunlight viewing. You see the sun when it has the most UV, which is at noon, between noon and 1 p.m. and when the sun sets. Now, is it important that it's these three? Well, yes. Why? Because these are the biggest changes in the environment. You see, for your body to track something, to regulate itself in relation to something, that thing needs to change. There would be no new signal being sent if the sun was up in the sky all day. But it is the changes in the light spectrum, more specifically the biggest changes in the light spectrum in the environment, that our bodies use to regulate themselves. So, you need to be exposed to these big changes in light. Of course, you've heard morning sunlight viewing, because the sun emits more blue light in the morning and blue light wakes us up. We need that blue light in the morning from the sun, not from screens, because the sun gives you far more than just blue light. But anyway, AM sun, when you wake up, ideally when the sun rises. Then at sunset, of course, yes, there's a big change. The sun goes below the horizon. That's a big event. You have far more red light, and that gives you melatonin, that anchors you into that point of the day, and your body sort of knows when you're going to sleep. It anchors your circadian rhythm. But what I haven't heard anyone talk about is there's a huge variation in UV. Okay, in the morning you barely have any UV. When the sun sets, you barely have any UV. But at noon, you have a bunch of UV, so it makes sense that our bodies use the amount of UV that's emitted by the sun as some sort of signal. It's not just the benefits of the UV, vitamin D, palm C, supplying energy to the tissues in the form of UV light, because our cells emit UV from the inside, according to Jack Ruse. But that's, far beyond me right now. It's not just about that. You probably also use that to signal a bunch of stuff. You know how blue light signals stuff and red light signals stuff? UV probably does the same. So you need to see the UV. So that's what you do if you live in modern society. You do morning sunlight viewing, you do UV viewing, and then you do sunset viewing. And again, skin and eyes for all of them. But for the UV, be a little bit careful. So you don't want to look directly at the sun with any of these. You know when the sun is in front of you and you're walking like in the direction of the sun and you're doing this, but it's not uncomfortable, You can still see everything, but the sun is like over there and it's not uncomfortable. That's sort of what we're talking about when we're talking about getting sunlight into the eyes. I just need to throw this out as a warning. Do not sun gaze. If it's the sunrise or the sunset and the sun is very weak and you feel like you can open your eyes in a relaxed manner and you can look in the sun's direction without any problems, sure, go ahead. But if it's noon or any other time where the sun is in the sky and everyone else squints, their face is turned toward the direction of the sun but they're not looking at it and they're doing this, the reason why is because the body's telling them that this light is too strong and if you look at it, you might get eye damage. We don't want eye damage, so please close your eyes a bit. If you go against that, you're going to damage your body. You're not listening to it. So sun gazing at noon is not listening to your body. How about the master? What does the absolute most optimal circadian routine look like? The most optimal, masterful, circadian, healthy routine is this: living outside and not missing a moment of the sun. Okay? When I wrote the note here, I thought it was poetic. Listen to this. Master lives outside, sees sun from sunrise to sunset, perfect circadian rhythm, anchored all the time, like all animals. I didn't intend for that to sound like a poem, but it does. And that's the beauty of being a human being who lives in nature. You're doing things perfectly from our perspective. The last thing I want to mention is the consistency of the length of the day throughout the year. What do I mean by this? In Sweden right now, it's 9 p.m. Look at how bright it is. There's a window in front of me. Look at my background. Look at how bright it is. If I'm on the 59th latitude, during the summer the day is going to be very long and the sun is going to rise, say at 3 a.m., 4 a.m. So when you wake up, the sun is already far up in the sky. And then when you go to bed, it might be bright outside. And that drastically affects your circadian rhythm because it can be 9 p.m., 10 p.m. And if you go for a walk and you come back, you don't really feel like going to bed. While in the winter, the sun goes down at 2 p.m. It goes down at 3 p.m., something like that. And that's horrible because for most of the day it's completely dark. So all you do is feel like sleeping. The closer you get to the equator, the more consistency there is in the length of the day throughout the year. And this is very, very good, because if you have a certain sleep schedule, you can lock that in. If I have a sleep schedule during the summer, let's say, that will completely, burn into ashes when autumn comes around and when winter comes around. So my sleep schedule continuously has to change. So my body can't adapt, which means that I'm less energy efficient. I need to use more energy from a circadian perspective. While someone at the equator, they're going to be far more energy efficient at the equator, because the time doesn't change, the length of the day doesn't change. The sun rises and sets at the same times every day, so there's a lot of consistency. So your body's more energy efficient, because that's one less thing to worry about, because it doesn't change. If it changes, there needs to be some work done to change it. If it doesn't change, then your body doesn't have to do anything. So in terms of circadian health, I'd say being at the equator is the absolute best, or at least being, between 0 and 15 in terms of the latitude, because then the length of the day throughout the year doesn't change as much. I have a free PDF called the 10 Dietary Rules. It's supposed to make nutrition easier for you. So you know how there are many contradictory opinions? You've got the paleo diet, the carnivore diet, this and that. I give you principles to follow that every healthy diet needs to satisfy. And that's the value in it. And it's free. So go to my website and get it if you're interested. And if you like that, then I have a book called The 6 Health Commandments. Rather than just giving you a bunch of cookie cutter nutrition stuff, or just delving into nutrition, it gives you everything. It gives you the principles that guide health. And trust me, it's not just nutrition. With that said, go and achieve excellent health. I know you can do it.